The birth of the twins and the mysterious prophecy. The village of Boku lay hidden between rolling green hills and the mighty Zino River. It was a land of warm days, cool nights, and a people bound by traditions as old as time. For generations, the villagers had lived in harmony with the land, believing that the river carried the whispers of fate. Some brought blessings, while others carried warnings. Among the villagers lived Joro and Seiya, a couple who were admired for their kindness and wisdom. Yet, their hearts were burdened with sorrow. They had been married for 10 years but had no children. They had prayed to the gods, offered sacrifices, and visited the village shamans, yet their home remained empty, void of a child's laughter. One evening, as Seiya sat alone by the river, staring at her reflection in the moonlit water, a voice broke the silence. "You carry sorrow in your heart," the voice said. Startled, Seiya turned to find an old woman standing behind her. She was small and frail, wrapped in layers of faded cloth, and her eyes glowed with a strange knowing. "Who are you?" Seiya whispered. "I am Mama Naya, keeper of secrets and messenger of fate," the woman replied. She reached into her tattered pouch and pulled out a small amulet, shaped like a twisting river. It shimmered under the moonlight. "Take this," Mama Naya said, pressing the amulet into Seiya's trembling hands. "Your wish will be granted. But know this, fate does not grant gifts without a price. The future holds a great challenge." Seiya's heart pounded. "What challenge?" she asked, but the old woman had already vanished into the night. "The birth of the twins." Days passed, then weeks. To Joro and Seiya's astonishment, Seiya became pregnant. The news spread through the village, filling the people with joy, for a child born after such a long wait was considered a blessing from the gods. But as the months went by, strange things began to happen. One night, Seiya dreamed of two golden fish swimming in a river, their tails twisting together before suddenly splitting apart and being swept in opposite directions. Another time, as Joro walked in the fields, a village elder approached him with worried eyes. "Joro," he said, "I had a vision last night. I saw a storm in the sky, and in its heart were two great stars. But one burned too bright, while the other faded into the shadows. Be watchful, my son." Joro did not know what to make of the elder's words. He dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man. Then came the night of the storm. As dark clouds rolled over Boku, thunder roared, and lightning split the sky. The air was thick with tension, and the wind howled like unseen spirits. Inside their small hut, Seiya screamed as labor pains gripped her body. The village midwives gathered, their faces tense as they helped her through the night. Outside, the storm raged on, shaking trees and making the river swell. Then, at the very moment a bolt of lightning struck the tallest tree in the village, the first baby's cry rang through the night. "A boy." Moments later, another cry followed. "A second boy." The villagers gasped. "Twins." The mysterious prophecy. The babies were beautiful, healthy, strong, and identical in every way. The midwives wrapped them in cloth and handed them to their exhausted mother. Joro knelt beside Seiya, his heart overflowing with joy and relief. "What shall we name them?" he whispered. Seiya smiled weakly and stroked the firstborn's cheek. "This one. Tono, for he is the blessing we prayed for." She turned to the second boy. "And this one? Kiso, for he is the surprise we never expected." The midwives beamed, but the village elders stood silent, their faces grave. One of them, Elder Beo, stepped forward and pointed at the baby's tiny hands. "Look," he murmured. The villagers leaned in. On each boy's palm, a strange symbol had appeared. One glowed golden on Tono's hand, the other dark as ink on Kiso's. The marks were identical, except one seemed to shine with warmth, while the other pulsed with a quiet shadow. The people began to whisper in fear. "The prophecy," an old woman muttered. The river's warning. Twins bring both fortune and doom. Elder Beo finally spoke, his voice heavy with meaning. It has been written in our ancestor scrolls, when the river gifts two from one, the village will know greatness, but the land will also tremble. Joro's face darkened. What does this mean for my sons? Elder Beo sighed. The prophecy does not say. But one thing is certain, these boys are bound by destiny. And one day, the river will call for them. The storm had passed, but the weight of the elder's words hung over the village like an unbroken cloud. A village divided. In the days that followed, joy was mixed with unease. Some villagers celebrated the twins, believing them to be a divine blessing. Others watched from a distance, fearful of the prophecy. Mama Naya returned one evening, standing by Sea's doorstep. Protect them, child, she warned softly. The river never forgets its own. Then, as mysteriously as she had come, she was gone. Sea clutched the twins tightly, her heart filling with a mother's unshakable love and silent dread. Would the prophecy prove true? Would the river one day tear her sons apart? Only time would tell. The brothers' opposing paths. Years passed, and the village of Boku watched as the twins, Tono and Kiso, grew into young men. From the moment they could walk, it was clear that they were nothing alike. Tono, the elder, was gentle and humble, always eager to help others. He spent his days tending to crops, helping the elderly, and learning the ways of leadership from their father, Joro. The villagers adored him. They often said, Tono carries the heart of the sun. Kiso, the younger, was different. He was fierce, bold, and driven by an unshakable desire to prove himself. He excelled in everything he did, farming, hunting, wrestling, and running, but it was never enough. Whenever Tono was praised, Kiso felt a shadow creeping over him, whispering that he would never be as loved as his brother. The more the village cheered for Tono, the deeper Kiso's resentment grew. A father's lesson on leadership. One evening, Joro called his sons to sit with him by the fire. The flames flickered, casting long shadows as the night air filled with the scent of roasting maize. My sons, Joro began, a great leader is not the strongest, nor the fastest. He is the one who serves his people with wisdom and kindness. Tono nodded, listening intently. Kiso clenched his fist. But what if a leader is the strongest and the fastest? Kiso asked, his voice edged with frustration. Joro studied him for a moment, then took 2 clay pots from beside the fire. One pot is sturdy but filled with sweet water, he said, lifting the first. The other is strong but empty. Tell me, which one would you drink from? Tono answered at once. The one with water. Joro smiled. And why? Because strength means nothing if it does not nourish others, Tono replied. Joro nodded. You see, Kiso, power without wisdom is like an empty pot, strong, but useless. Strength should be used to protect, not to conquer. Kiso remained silent, but inside, his anger burned. A brother's jealousy. The village continued to favor Tono. At festivals, they cheered for him. At gatherings, they sought his wisdom. Kiso was no less skilled, yet they always chose his brother. One day, after Tono won a village wrestling contest, the people lifted him onto their shoulders, celebrating his victory. Kiso watched from the crowd, his heart pounding. Why do they love him more, he thought bitterly. Am I not just as strong? Just as worthy? His hands curled into fists. He would prove them wrong. That night, Kiso sat alone by the river, glaring at his own reflection. The wind howled through the trees, whispering through the reeds. And then, a voice came. The arrival of Margot. You seek power, don't you? Kiso jolted upright. A figure stood nearby, cloaked in darkness. His long robe shimmered like oil on water, and his eyes gleamed like burning coals. "Who are you?" Kiso asked, uneasy. "I am Margot, a traveler of distant lands. I have seen warriors rise and kingdoms fall," the man said smoothly. "And I have seen young men hunger for greatness." Kiso narrowed his eyes. "Why are you here?" Margot took a step forward. "I know your pain, Kiso. I know what it is like to be overshadowed." Kiso stiffened. "I am not overshadowed." Margot smiled. "No. Then why do they cheer for him instead of you?" The words struck like an arrow. Kiso's hands clenched. Because they do not see my strength." Margot chuckled. "Then let me show you a way to make them see." Kiso hesitated. He had been warned about strangers bearing secrets. But the desire to prove himself overpowered his caution. "How?" he asked. Margot's voice lowered to a whisper. "The river, Kiso. It holds power that only the bold dared to claim." "The curse power of the river." Kiso frowned. "The river? But the elders say it is sacred." Margot's grin widened. "Sacred? Or feared?" Kiso swallowed. He had always known there was something unnatural about the river. The way it spoke in whispers, how it charmed like a restless beast on certain nights. Why would the village fear something so powerful? Margot continued. "Because they do not want you to surpass Tono." Kiso's pulse quickened. Margot stepped closer, his voice like silk and shadows. "There is a hidden power deep within the river, waiting for someone brave enough to claim it. Cast this into the water," he said, pulling out a black stone, smooth and cold. "If you truly desire strength, throw it in, and the river will awaken." Kiso hesitated. He thought of his father's words, of the empty pot, of wisdom over strength. Then he thought of Tono, standing before the cheering crowd. "This is my chance." Without another thought, he took the stone and hurled it into the river. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the river shuddered. A deep, guttural sound rose from the depths, like a beast awakening after a long slumber. The water began to swirl unnaturally fast, and a dark mist slithered across the surface. The trees groaned. The air grew heavy. And then, it stopped. Kiso gasped. The river was still again. The mist had vanished. He turned to Margot. "What now?" Margot's grin stretched wider than before. "Now, Kiso, you will become unstoppable." A change in Kiso. The next morning, Kiso felt different. His muscles were stronger. His reflexes faster. His mind sharper. It was as if his body had been reborn overnight. At training, he defeated warriors twice his size with ease. He outran the swiftest hunters. He lifted weights that even the strongest men struggled to carry. The villagers stared in awe. But along with his newfound power, something else had changed. Kiso's laughter grew rare. His patience shortened. His once playful smile turned sharp, calculating. The villagers began to whisper. "Something is different about him. His strength is unnatural." Even Joro and Seiya noticed the change. Tono, too, felt it. His brother's presence had once been familiar, now, it felt like a storm waiting to break. One evening, as they stood by the river, Tono finally asked, "Kiso, what happened to you?" Kiso smirked. "I became who I was meant to be." Tono shivered. He did not know why, but something about his brother's eyes reminded him of the river's darkest depths. The storm is coming. The village had yet to understand the full price of Kiso's power. But the river knew. The river always knew. And soon, it would come to collect. The forbidden pact with the river. The night air was thick with silence. The village of Boku slept under the watchful eye of the crescent moon, unaware that the balance of their world was about to shift. Wrapped in the cloak of darkness, Kiso crept through the shadows, his heart pounding with anticipation. His feet barely made a sound as he moved past the sleeping huts, past the fields, past the great baobab tree where the elders gathered during the day. He had waited for this moment. Tonight, he would claim his destiny. Ahead, by the restless banks of the Zeno River, stood a lone figure. Margot. His dark robe rippled in the wind, though the air was still. His eyes gleamed as if he had been expecting Kiso all along. "You have come," Margot said, his voice smooth as oil. Kiso nodded. His pulse raced, his hands clenched at his sides. "I am ready." Margot's lips curled into a knowing smile. The river's secret. Margot stepped forward, his voice lowering to a whisper. "This river," he murmured, "is not just water. It is alive. It has seen kings rise and fall. It has granted power to the fearless and swallowed the weak. And now, it is watching you, Kiso." Kiso's breath quickened. He had always known the river was different, the way it seemed to whisper on certain nights, the way it pulsed beneath the surface like something breathing. "And what does it want from me?" he asked. Margot chuckled. "Nothing it does not already own." He reached into his cloak and pulled out a black stone, smooth and cold, its surface pulsing with a faint, eerie glow. "Throw this into the river," Margot instructed. "And the river will awaken." Kiso took the stone. It felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the weight of something unseen. He hesitated for the first time. What will it take in return? Margot's smile never wavered. Power is never free. "But tell me, Kiso, do you not deserve to be more than a shadow? To be greater than Tono?" Kiso's fingers tightened around the stone. Yes. He had spent his whole life being second. He was done waiting. Without another word, he threw the stone into the river. The river awakens. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ground trembled. The river's calm waters churned violently, as though something deep beneath the surface had awakened from a long slumber. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of earth and something ancient. Kiso's chest tightened. The wind around him howled, but Margot stood still, unshaken. Then, the river split open. A shadow rose from the depths, stretching high into the night sky. It had no true form, shifting like smoke, but its eyes burned red, deep and endless like the pits of the underworld. Kiso could not move. A voice rumbled through the air, deep and guttural, shaking the trees, the earth, the very sky. "Who calls upon the river of the forgotten?" Kiso swallowed his fear. "I do." The shadow leaned closer, and Kiso felt its presence crawl over his skin like 1,000 unseen hands. "You seek power." "Yes," Kiso whispered. The shadow laughed, a sound that sent chills down Kiso's spine. "Then power you shall have. But all gifts must be paid for." Kiso hesitated. "What do you want?" The shadow did not answer. Instead, it lifted its smoky hand and pressed it against Kiso's chest. A searing pain shot through him, burning deep into his bones. He gasped, but he did not cry out. He would not show weakness. The shadow pulled back. "It is done." Kiso fell to his knees, panting, his body trembling. Margot stepped forward, placing a hand on Kiso's shoulder. "Rise, Kiso," he whispered. "You are no longer ordinary." Kiso lifted his gaze, and for the first time, he felt it, something dark, something powerful coursing through his veins. He stood, his muscles strumming with an energy he had never known. "I feel different," he murmured. Margot's grin was wider than ever. "Good. Now go, and show them who you truly are." The change in Kiso. By morning, Kiso was not the same. His body moved with unnatural speed and strength, his every motion smooth, effortless. At the training grounds, he defeated warriors twice his size with a single strike. He ran faster than the swiftest hunters, his footsteps barely touching the earth. The villagers watched in awe, but there was fear in their eyes. Even Tono noticed. "You've changed, brother," he said one evening as they stood by the river. Kiso smirked. "Have I?" Tono studied him, his brows furrowed. "It's not just your strength. It's something else. You feel different." Kiso stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Maybe I've simply embraced what I was always meant to be." Tono shivered. He did not know why, but the look in Kiso's eyes reminded him of something from his nightmares. A heart turned dark. As the days passed, Kiso's victories stacked higher and higher. Yet, with each triumph, something inside him shifted. He no longer laughed. His once bright eyes were shadowed. His presence, once warm, had become cold, calculating. He no longer fought for honor, but for dominance. One evening, during a wrestling match, Kiso nearly broke a young warrior's arm, refusing to release his grip even after the boy surrendered. It took 3 elders to pull him away. "Kiso!" Joro scolded, furious. "What is happening to you?" Kiso only stared at his father with empty eyes. "I am becoming what I was meant to be," he said. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The Whispering River. That night, as Kiso stood by the river, he heard the whispers. They came from the water, soft but insistent. Power always comes at a price. Kiso ignored them. He had what he wanted. But the river never gives without taking. And soon, it would come to collect. A village divided and the looming curse. The village of Boku was no longer the same. The people had once gathered in joy, celebrating the strength and skill of their young warriors. But now, the air was thick with unease. At the center of it all was Kiso. Kiso's reign of dominance. Ever since the night by the river, Kiso had changed. His power was no longer just skill, it was something unnatural. During the village competitions, he won every event with ease. In wrestling, his opponents fell within seconds. In archery, his arrows never missed their mark. In hunting, he could run faster than the swiftest gazelle and take down prey with his bare hands. The villagers watched in awe, then in fear. This was not normal. "How can a man move like that?" some whispered. His eyes, they don't look the same anymore. Even those who had once cheered for him now stood at a distance. Antonio watched in silence. At first, he had been proud of his brother. But now, he saw something different in Kiso's victories. They were not earned, they were taken. Kiso no longer fought to prove himself. He fought to dominate. A father's warning. One evening, Joro found Kiso standing alone in the village square, staring at his own reflection in the blade of a spear. Joro stepped beside him, his face lined with worry. "My son," he said, "power is like fire. It can warm or it can destroy. You are letting it consume you." Kiso chuckled, turning to his father with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Is it wrong to be strong, father?" he asked. "Should I lower myself just so others do not fear me?" Joro sighed. "Strength without wisdom is a blade without a handle. One day, it will cut the one who wields it." For a moment, Kiso said nothing. Then, with a dismissive shrug, he turned away. "I have no use for warnings, old man." Joro's heart ached. He could feel it, something dark was gripping his son. And whatever it was growing. The signs of the curse. It began with the crops. Fields that had once been golden with maize and millet began to wither, their leaves turning black overnight. Then, the animals fled. The village goats, the oxen, even the birds that filled the morning sky, they vanished, as if sensing something unnatural. Then, the river changed. Its once clear waters grew murky, swirling with a darkness that no one dared to drink from. At night, the elders heard whispers rising from the banks. And the people of Boku knew. This was no ordinary misfortune. Something was very wrong. And it all began when Kiso changed. Tono's growing fear. Tono felt the shift before anyone else. Whenever Kiso walked through the village, the people stepped back. They no longer cheered his name. Children who had once idolized him now hid behind their mothers. Tono had seen warriors become arrogant before, but this was different. One evening, he stood by the river, watching its darkened waters twist and churn. And for the first time, he felt afraid. He turned to find his mother, Seiya, watching him. Her eyes were shadowed with a fear she had not spoken aloud. "Mother," Tono asked, "do you feel it too?" She nodded slowly. "Something unnatural is holding onto your brother." Then, she held out something small. A tiny, worn amulet. Tono's breath caught. It was the amulet Mama Naya had given them at birth. The very thing she had warned them to protect. The truth in the amulet. That night, Seiya sat before the fire, her fingers trembling as she traced the patterns on the amulet. She had long forgotten about it. But now, as she turned it in her hands, something stirred inside her. A memory. Mama Naya's words echoed in her mind. Fate does not grant gifts without a price. Her heart pounded. She turned the amulet over and saw something she had never noticed before. A symbol. The same mark that had appeared on Kiso's hand at birth. The realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. The amulet was the key. And Kiso's fate was tied to it. The village shaman's warning. Seiya rushed to the hut of the village shaman, a man known only as Elder Wixa. The old man studied the amulet in silence. Then, he exhaled a deep, heavy sigh. "The river has claimed him," he murmured. Seiya's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Elder Wixa looked up, his eyes filled with sorrow. "The river does not give without taking." Tono, who had followed his mother, felt a chill creep up his spine. "What will it take?" he asked. The shaman's gaze darkened. "He saw." Seiya gasped. Tono's fist clenched. There must be a way to stop it. The elder looked at them both long and hard. Then, he spoke. "When the river calls, it does not wait. If Kiso does not turn back soon, it will take him forever." Silence filled the hut. The fire crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. And for the first time, Tono understood. His brother was not just in danger. He was running out of time. The shadow over Boku. The village of Boku had become a place of fear. The elders held whispered meetings. The people avoided the river at all costs. And at the center of it all, Kiso stood alone. He felt the distance growing between himself and the people. But he did not care. Why should he? They had once ignored him. Now they feared him. And fear was just as good as respect. Wasn't it? But on some nights, when the wind howled through the trees, he would hear the whispers in the river. Soft. Calling. And somewhere, deep in his chest, a fear he could not name began to grow. The river will soon collect its due. The balance was broken. The village was divided. And the river was waiting. Soon, it would call for what belonged to it. And this time, Kiso would have no choice but to answer the trial of the river spirits. The river calls. The night was unnaturally silent. No crickets chirped. No wind rustled the trees. The moon hung heavy and golden, casting long shadows over the village of Boku. Tono stirred in his sleep, his breath uneasy. Then, a voice. It came like a whisper on the wind, soft yet powerful, slipping into his mind like water seeping through cracks. Come. He sat up, his heart pounding. Across the village, Kiso awoke at the same moment. His chest tightened, his body drawn toward an unseen force. The river was calling them. Without a word, both brothers rose from their beds, stepping into the night. Neither knew why. Neither could resist. Their feet moved on their own, leading them toward the dark, restless waters of the Zeno River. And when they arrived, they were not alone. Mama Naya's warning. Standing at the edge of the water, wrapped in tattered robes, was Mama Naya. Her face was unreadable, her old eyes filled with something that looked like sorrow and finality. You have both been chosen, she said, her voice heavy with meaning. Tono and Kiso exchanged wary glances. Chosen for what? Tono asked. Mama Naya gestured toward the river. The balance of this land has been broken. The river demands its trial. Only one of you may walk away untouched. Kiso scoffed. A trial. I have nothing to prove. Mama Naya's lips tightened. Then turn back now. Kiso hesitated. Tono stepped forward. What must we do? The old woman raised her hands. The river will show you. A gust of wind howled through the trees. The water, once still, began to churn violently, forming a swirling vortex of darkness and light. Then, as if the river itself had opened its mouth, a deep voice rumbled from the depths. Enter. Tono's heart pounded. Kiso's breath quickened. The brothers locked eyes. Then, together, they dove into the cursed waters. The trial begins. The moment they hit the water, the world shifted. Gone was the night sky. Gone was the village. They were in another realm. The water around them was dark and endless, stretching into eternity. Above, there was no sky, only an eerie golden glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. A whispering current tugged at them, leading them deeper. Then, the voice of the river spoke. Retrieve what is lost. Choose wisely. Your fate will be sealed. Ahead, two objects lay waiting on the riverbed. On one side, a golden crystal, glowing with a warm, radiant light. It pulsed gently, as if alive. On the other, a black dagger, its blade jagged and sharp, absorbing the light around it. Tono felt his chest tighten. He reached toward the golden crystal, his fingers brushing its warm surface. At the same moment, Kiso lunged for the dagger. The moment he touched it, the river roared. The spirit awakens. A shockwave erupted through the water, forcing Tono backward. The peaceful glow of the crystal dimmed as shadows spilled from the dagger, twisting like living smoke. The water turned black as ink, and the golden glow above flickered, as if struggling to hold on. Then, a shadowy figure rose from the depths. It was massive, its form constantly shifting, its eyes burning like fire. And when it spoke, the entire river trembled. You have chosen the path of power, and now you must pay the price. Kiso's grip tightened on the dagger. He tried to speak, but his voice was lost in the currents. The shadowy spirit raised its hand, pointing directly at him. A sacrifice must be made. The weight of the words crushed the water around them. Kiso's heart pounded. He turned to Tono, who clutched the golden crystal, his face pale. A sacrifice. Tono's voice was barely a whisper. Mama Naya's words from long ago echoed in Kiso's mind. The river does not give without taking. His stomach twisted. What must I give? The spirit's voice rumbled like thunder. Your brother. The choice. Tono's breath hitched. Kiso froze. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, Kiso laughed. It was a hollow, bitter sound. You mean I must kill him to keep my power? The spirit did not answer. Tono stepped forward, shaking his head. Kiso, don't listen to it. But Kiso's eyes were different now. Dark. Lost. You always had everything, Tono, Kiso whispered. The love of the village. The respect of father. The future. He lifted the dagger. Why shouldn't it be me instead? Tono's chest tightened. Kiso, this isn't you. Kiso's grip trembled. The dagger felt heavy, too heavy. But then, the spirit's voice cut through the water once more. Decide. Or the river will decide for you. The water grew wild, spinning around them like a whirlpool of fate. Kiso's hands shook. His breath came ragged. And for the first time, he saw himself. Not as a warrior. Not as a victor. But as a man drowning in his own darkness. The dagger, it was not just a weapon. It was a curse. A chain. And he had shackled himself willingly. Tono held out his hand. Brother, let it go. Kiso's vision blurred. Let it go. The river's judgment. With a shaky breath, Kiso dropped the dagger. The moment the blade hit the riverbed, the spirit screamed. The shadows exploded outward, shattering into 1,000 tiny shards, dissolving into the water. The golden glow returned, washing over them both. The river's voice spoke one last time. Balance has been restored. Then, silence. The realm around them faded. The water pushed them upward. And suddenly, they were breaking through the surface, gasping for air. They had returned. The river was calm once more. And on the bank, Mama Naya watched with knowing eyes. A life changed forever. Kiso lay on the riverbank, his chest heaving. The weight was gone. The whispers were gone. But so was his strength. The unnatural power that had once flowed through him had vanished. He was normal. And for the first time, he felt free. Tono sat beside him, watching him in silence. You made the right choice, he finally said. Kiso closed his eyes. For the first time, he believed him. The river will always remember. The village would never know what truly happened that night. But the river did. And though it had released Kiso from its grip, it would always remember his name. For the river never forgets. And it never forgives the river's final demand. The river was calm, too calm. Its dark waters stretched before them like a beast lying in wait. The air was thick with something unseen, something ancient watching. Kiso felt it before he heard it. The voice of the river rose once more, deep and unrelenting. The price has not been paid. A chill crawled down Kiso's spine. He turned to see the spirit, a towering shadow rising from the water, its fiery eyes locked onto him. You took power, Kiso, the spirit rumbled. But power does not come without cost. The river has given, and now it must take. Kiso's chest tightened. What do you mean? The shadow loomed closer. Your soul belongs to the river. Kiso's breath hitched. He staggered backward, the weight of those words pressing against him like a crushing tide. No. This couldn't be happening. He had given up the dagger. He had surrendered the darkness. Hadn't he? The whispers of the river turned to a roar. The water churned violently, as though preparing to swallow him whole. Panic surged through him. He couldn't let this happen. And then his eyes fell on Tono, still clutching the golden crystal. A desperate thought took hold. Brother against brother. Kiso's breathing grew ragged. No. 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 This was not how his story would end. If the river wanted something, it wouldn't be him. It would be Tono. With a guttural cry, he lunged. Tono barely had time to react before Kiso slammed into him, gripping his wrist. "Give it to me!" Kiso roared, wrestling for the golden crystal. Tono's eyes widened in shock. "Kiso, stop!" But Kiso was beyond listening. His nails dug into Tono's skin, his heart pounding like a war drum. He was stronger. He was faster. He would win. The crystal was slipping from Tono's grasp. Then, the river rose. A wall of water surged between them, throwing them apart like leaves in a storm. Tono was flung backward onto the riverbank. Kiso was trapped in the water's grip. Tono's final sacrifice. Kiso struggled against the current, but it was like fighting against an invisible force. The river was taking him. His body twisted in the dark water, his lungs burning as the spirit's voice thundered once more. The debt must be paid. Tono scrambled to his feet, the golden crystal still in his hands. His heart pounded as he looked from Kiso to the spirit, to the raging river. And then, he knew. There was only one way. Without hesitation, Tono lifted the golden crystal high above his head. "Take this instead," he shouted. "Take my offering, but spare my brother." The moment the words left his lips, the crystal fled with blinding light. The river froze. The spirit's gaze turned toward the glowing stone, its fire-filled eyes flickering. The golden crystal paused, once, twice, then shattered into 1,000 glowing shards. The storm ceased. The water stilled. The shadowy spirit began to dissolve, its dark form fading like mist before the sun. And just like that, Kiso was free. The river's judgment. The water spat Kiso out, leaving him gasping on the riverbank. The village elders rushed forward, their faces lined with both relief and sadness. The river was calm again. The whispers had faded. But something had changed. Tono knelt beside Kiso, gripping his shoulders. "You're safe now," he whispered. Kiso looked at him, really looked at him. And in that moment, he knew. Tono had given up his own path to power to save him. But Kiso himself had lost everything. The river had let him go, but it had marked him forever. And there was only one way forward. Exile. The village elders gathered. The people stood in silence, their eyes full of both relief and grief. Elder Wixer stepped forward. "The river has been appeased," he said. "The balance has been restored." He turned to Kiso. "But you can no longer remain here." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Tono's head snapped up. "No." But Kiso raised a hand, silencing him. He understood. He had brought darkness to the village. He had betrayed his own brother. And though the river had spared him, he did not belong here anymore. Kiso bowed his head. "I will go." Saya let out a quiet sob. Joro placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression unreadable. Tono clenched his jaw. There were no words to fight this. Because deep down, he knew it was true. And so, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Kiso gathered only what he could carry. He did not look back. And the village watched as he disappeared into the mist. A new leader, a lasting lesson. With Kiso gone, life in Boku slowly returned to peace. The crops grew again. The animals returned. The river remained calm. Tono, now the eldest son and rightful leader, took his place as the guide of the village. But he ruled not with pride, nor with strength. He ruled with wisdom, with kindness, with the lessons of the past. He spoke of the dangers of unchecked ambition. He taught the children that true strength was not in power, but in knowing when to let go. And though the village healed, one thing never changed. The river never forgets. On some nights, when the moon was high and the wind was still, Tono would sit by the edge of the Zeno River. And if he listened closely, he could still hear whispers rising from the water. A name. A voice. Kiso. For the river never forgets. And it never truly lets go.